Hey all, DT Neal talking again about writing, and in this case, science fiction. One thing I've said for years is that the most credible representation of science fiction we kind of face these days, in as much as it reflects where society is heading, is post-apocalyptic science fiction. If the quickest thing I could think of is think of Mad Max and the Road Warrior, all that. And that's frightening, or should be frightening. Cormac McCarthy's The Road, for example. Think of that and feel a sense of terror, because what that really represents is society's failure to transcend the various problems and collapsing into a tribalistic wasteland, whether environmental or nuclear, right, or both. That idea of people at each other's throats doing what humanity's been doing for thousands of years, just that they're wearing, makeshift hockey armor and shooting each other with crossbows. That should put the fear in a lot of people, in as much as it reflects a lot of where society, especially American society, is heading. It's interesting, that again, the Mad Max universe was set in Australia, because so much of that is even more suited to an American world. And when we're seeing it right now with the catastrophe that's in place. And there are still lessons to be had. A big portion of that stuff is involved with how do you retain your humanity in the face of the apocalypse? How does human nature persist and ideally improve itself in the face of need, desperation, starvation, the collapse of morals, the collapse of the ecosystem, at least the ecosystem that is conducive to human life. And again, looking at the post-apocalyptic fiction, there is it's lapsed technology. Like, it's sort of like the ruins, the efficacy of ruins. Because everyday people are living, they're eating cat food out of cans, right? They're scrambling for water. They're so busy trying to survive, and there's just around them are ruins of buildings, cars left behind. Just ruination is at the heart of that. And I think, living in civilization as we are, I've said this a number of times too, where it's jarring to think that we are effectively living in the prologue of a post-apocalyptic tale. Like, if someone were telling a story around a makeshift fire and mentioning this world that we take for granted and that we're living in, that idea of this civilization around us before the collapse. And I fear that these maniacs, these tech bros and their bunkers, who are so foolish, because I look at that and think those folk, their greatest security is in maintaining civilization in some form. Because if you take a billionaire out of a market economy and they're in a bunker protected by a bunch of people, like, money becomes meaningless. That person, that billionaire, becomes meaningless unless he builds a cult following of people who worship him and think he's some kind of demigod. But really, they're not. Like their equivalent of their Praetorian Guard equivalent would put an end to them in a heartbeat. They'd be like, why are we protecting this bunker for you? Screw you. We're going to take it over, and we'll have all the food we need for the near term. And there it goes. So science fiction's tried to warn us. No one paid attention to the warnings. We are lurching toward, societal collapse. And the likely scenarios point to this post-apocalyptic world. And sadly, for me, that is a giant step back for humanity. And it's frustrating because we've made a lot of progress over the centuries, and it's really galling to think that the greed of a particular handful of people and the complicity of a larger group of people around that handful has put us into that point. And again, science fiction has attempted to tackle that thematically and through characters and stories in a way that I think will have more relevance, or not, or we will collapse and people won't think about that, and they really will be, stabbing each other with makeshift spears as they are struggling and fighting for food when they didn't have to, right? And that's a key point to be delved into further.